Tell us about this project, Brightline West. It's the second Brightline project after Florida. Give us a sense of how big a business this is in success.
First of all, thanks for having me on, David. You know, it's a great time for us. It's a great time for the rail business. And so we, as you said, we broke ground earlier today on Brightline West, which is the second train project for us. But it's most notably, it's the first high-speed train, true high-speed rail that'll be built in America. And that's a big deal and a monumental occasion. And I think actually even a bigger deal is I really do think that this is now the beginning of the high-speed rail industry in the U.S., which I think has got, massive, opportunities and growth in front of it. So it's a really exciting time.
Given your investment tracker, you've checked how much demand there is out there potentially, and you've concluded it's big enough to support this and make it a good business. How much demand is there?
There's about 50 million trips that happen between Los Angeles and Las Vegas every year. About 85% of those happen by car. And I don't know if you've ever done the drive from Las Vegas to LA, but it's a notably difficult drive. It's probably 4 hours in the best case. It's very, very unreliable in terms of what the time actually is. And so there's a tremendous amount of demand between these two cities. There's only one way to get there, which is on I-15. And so our train is going to go right down the middle of I-15. And we think it's going to have a massive amount of demand from people that make that trip.
This is not your first foray. You have Brightline up and running in Florida, right, between Miami and Orlando. What have you learned from that will change what you do in Brightline West?
Well, I'd say most notably we learned that people like trains, right? So we have millions of people that ride our train down there. The adoption of it in South Florida and now up to Orlando has been terrific. We opened the route from Miami all the way to Orlando recently. It was actually last September. The numbers have been fantastic, and we're very optimistic about the future of that train. The biggest lesson I'd say is that when we built that train, we basically use the existing rail corridor for a portion of it. So basically from Miami up to Cocoa Beach, it's kind of a straight shot from south to north. At that point, you turn left and then go across Route 528 to the Orlando airport. That's how the route is made. What we did, that because we had access to the train, it was version 1.0, as I said, it makes a lot of sense. But there's a lot of things about it that we think can be improved on. In particular, there's a lot of rail crossings there because it runs up really US Highway 1. So this train from Vegas to LA will site it in the middle of I-15. It's a big 200-foot wide corridor, put it right in the middle of it. And because of that, you can put a fence around it, you can electrify it, no rail crossings, you can go true high speed. So, north of 200 miles an hour is kind of the objective. And that version 2.0 is what we think makes sense for this corridor. And I think it's a good blueprint for what we should find success with in other parts of the country as well.
What's the time horizon you're looking at for these investments? I believe you're cash positive in Brightline out in Florida now. But you haven't recouped the investment yet, but you're cash positive. How long until you actually recoup investment in Brightline, or for that matter, Brightline West?
I think from this point forward in Brightline East, it's all systems go. We're adding more capacity this summer in June with more train cars, the same in the end of the year in December, and the same again next year. And so with that, you'll then get to higher ridership levels, higher revenues. And we think that that's a time in which we'll start to look at, different alternatives in terms of financing, bringing in equity, et cetera, et cetera. Brightline West is a bit of a different situation in that it's a unitary train line that goes from LA to Vegas. So, and as I said, there's 50 million trips that happens on that route already, most of them by car. So we think that the adoption rate for it is going to be rapid once it's up and running. And I think that the capitalization for it is also give us a lot of alternatives as a result. But I think that not only the train be incredibly popular and satisfy demand and be green and safer and all those things, I think it'll also be highly profitable and a terrific investment. I'm a big believer in it.
Do you have a sense of when you would bring in other investors, either equity or debt?
Yeah, we have brought in, modest investors. I mean, I'm a large investor in it personally, so I'm a big believer in it. I kind of eat my own cooking, so to speak, with it, and have for a long time. I think that it's an investable, project now, and so the groundbreaking today, I think, signifies kind of the next layer of it, and I think that there will be some investment opportunities both in the debt and equity side in the upcoming kind of months between now and the end of the year. And then I think as you get under construction, I think that there's lots and lots of different opportunities to grow the business, because this is something clearly can be replicated at other city fairs around the country.
Tell us about the government role. We had Secretary Buttigieg come out for the groundbreaking for Brightline West. How critical is the government? Can these happen without the government really supporting them?
I think in the long term, the answer is absolutely yes. But I think that there's lots of examples of government playing pivotal role to getting new industries off the ground. So if you look at the history of, Elon Musk with his SpaceX, or the electric vehicles, or subsidies for the solar business, there's lots of examples of things that started out being subsidized and then turned into be big, robust businesses. And I think the train is going to follow those same footsteps. So when you say government, there's many governments involved. So it's really a coalition of local governments and state governments and federal governments, all of them playing a big role. Obviously, the federal government and the Department of Transportation, providing a $3 billion grant was a huge part of this. But frankly, so were, the delegations from Nevada and from California. Frankly, the governor in Nevada, Governor Lombardo has been an incredible supporter. The DOT, the Department of Transportation, is our partner in Nevada for this project. So, I like to think that it takes everyone to say yes and only one person to say no to derail these kind of projects. And fortunately, we have such a compelling project that we've actually had nothing but yeses. So it's a really good position to be in.
Assuming continued success, where next? And particularly for those of us in the Northeast, is there any prospect of this ever happening in the Northeast?
You need a kind of a unitary corridor that you don't share with anybody else. So the Northeast, obviously, the Acela route from New York to Washington and New York to Boston is incredibly popular and is actually quite profitable. So that's a great thing. To go at the highest speeds, you'd need to have a little bit more of a confined corridor, if that makes sense. So when we think of the places that are likely to be next on the list, it's city pairs that have got the same characteristics as we see here, which are two big population centers separated by 200 or 300 miles, lots of travel between them, and lots of traffic between them. So, Atlanta, Charlotte, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, that whole triangle in Texas is one, Portland, Seattle, Chicago to St. Louis. There's lots of different expressions of it. And I think that the successful launch of this will be the beginning, not again only of the next rail system, but of the rail industry.